Hey everyone, welcome to my own little void in space and time, apparently. Yeah, looks kind of weird. But anyways, you may be noticing that with this unit overview thing, it's kind of different from my last two ones, but this time it's because I wanted to make it look more professional. I would love to hear your opinions on the change from the first two times that we've done this to now, and the new presentation. So I guess we'll just hop on in, shall we? Alrighty, so let's move on to colorless. That's our first color, I guess. And this time we're picking on another archer because people were asking, well, I didn't get Takumi, so who should I get? Well, first up, let's put the elements up. Alrighty, good and good. Now let's move over to our first look at our unit, and that is George. At least I believe it's George. It has a J. Who knows? But George, outside of, Takumi, who has counter, George is actually quite powerful. No, really, he's insanely powerful. His stat gains are impressive. His attack is usually somewhere in the upper 40s by the end of level 40, which means that he's going to be dealing a lot of damage. Also, add to the fact that if you manage to get him to rank 5, he also gains access to the Partha, which is a bow that grants resistance upon initiating a battle, and that means that he'll take less damage from mages and deal a lot more to them. But let's take a look at his abilities, because those can make or break a character. And for George here, oh man, beautiful. Rising Flame and Blazing Flame for the special skills are fantastic. That basically, if you're familiar with Young Tiki at all, it's essentially the same thing. After 5 attacks or 5 counterattacks, whatever, he gains access to the ability to use a horizontal AoE attack to units around that unit that he's attacking. So basically he gains access to AoE damage, which is definitely very useful for an archer. But hold on to your hats real quick, because there's also his passive skills. You see, George gains access to Seal Attack, which means after combat with a unit, the unit he attacks loses the attack stat. I'm saying attack a lot. What's your problem? Still though, I believe at rank 3, which is the top maximum amount of Seal Attack that you can get, it is -7 attack to that unit, which is, well, insane. Mostly because, as I've said before in the last video, attack and defense debuffs are quite essential in the whole meta right now. Not only does that really change how much a unit gets hit for, or how much they hit for as well, it can be the difference between an arena match or a story mode on Lunatic. And I highly suggest picking up George if you want to really try and push that envelope a bit further. He also, of course, gains access to Spur Speed, which is already an insane amount of versatility for this guy. Seriously, if Takumi didn't have the countering abilities that he had, it would probably go to George, because his abilities are just so versatile. It's definitely something to look into. If you get him, I suggest using him, but that's just me. So let's go over some pros and cons before we wrap up George here. First off and foremost, so let me just say this, he's extremely versatile, and I mean insanely versatile. Not only can he debuff enemies, he can do AoE damage and buff your allies. He also, of course, has a pretty good attack stat. All around, he is a great unit to get. The only cons I can really see for George right now are the fact that, of course, he lacks resistance and he lacks defense, but that's pretty much the common archer staple when it comes down to it. You typically just want him to be at a ranged, and well, that's pretty much what he's gonna do there. You just need to be careful with him. He is extremely powerful when you do use him correctly. Alright, so let's move on to red. So let's just move George on out, and here we go. The red for today's episode is Leo. And oh boy, Leo is a monster in his own right, so I guess I'll just explain this real quick, okay? His weapon, Brynhild, essentially means that he can attack, and when he does attack, not only does it do a lot of damage, it also reduces the enemy's movement, which means they can move less. Sometimes they can't even move at all if it's a certain unit. So essentially, he can cripple people while doing a lot of damage. So while you're kiting with Brynhild, you'll also have access to his special skills Rising Light and Blazing Light. And basically what this attack does is, after the charges are complete, he'll do an AoE shockwave, basically, around the unit he's attacking. It'll do less damage, but it will damage foes around that unit. And that means that he basically has an AoE potential as well. Oh, man. I'm really missing out on some of these characters, seriously. Oh, but that's not all. He also gains access to quick repost in his passives, which basically means he automatically makes a follow-up attack if his health is above 90, 80, or 70 based on the level of the skill. Not only that, he also gains access to Savage Blow, which, if you're familiar with Camilla at all, basically means that whenever he initiates an attack, if there are any units nearby that unit that you're attacking, they'll also get hit for a select amount of damage. Basically, Leo is meant to do a lot of AoE damage and do it often. And I mean, my god. So let's take a look at pros and then we'll move on to cons, which honestly are very few. Pros, well, in case you weren't listening, he's an AoE monster. Not only can his weapon destroy movement, he can also cast AoEs around that target, and then he can also get an AoE every time he attacks, essentially meaning that he will constantly do AoE damage around a target. Not including, of course, the damage he's doing to the target. So, he is an exceptional mage. Exceptional. If you get him, you are one lucky duck. Seriously, this guy, he can destroy. And since the red meta is all in full impact, oh boy. He's also pretty defensive and resistant. No, really, he is. I mean, his stat gains in defense and resistance are actually quite high. And that means that he can take a bit more damage than most mages that would probably go into battle. So I guess that's another plus for him. The only con I can really see for Leo is that typically, and this goes for George as well, Blazing Light and those abilities that take 5 turns, typically you may not really see them in battle, mostly because of how turns work. Arena usually ends in 3 to 4 turns, and unless he's in there actively attacking, which I don't think he really should be, like he shouldn't be up there trying to defend against anything, he's mostly there to take pop shots and do a lot of damage. He can be a slow burner, which is kind of the problem with a lot of these abilities that take 5 turns. Granted, the effect that he does get out of it is quite, well, amazing, obviously, but still, he might be a bit slow to start. Still though, he does a lot of damage and he is just fantastic. If you get him, good on ya. So that's all for Leo. And with that, it's time to move on to Blue. And starting off with Blue, we're going to talk about a songstress by the name of Asura. Okay, so I'm just going to say this right now. Asura can be both bright and dull at the same time, and that's kind of representative in her weapon, which is the Sapphire Lance at later ranks, which basically modifies the triangle, giving her 20% more damage based on the weapon triangle, meaning she's going to do more damage to red, but do less to green, which isn't actually a bad thing for her, because right now in the arena you'll oftentimes run into more red units than you would any other, and she can essentially do a ton of damage to them, because for some reason she has a lot of attack, and I'm not kidding, she has a pretty high attack stat for a singer, like songstress. No, really, she does. But as I said, brilliant and dull as well. She is frail. Don't send her out alone. Don't try to go in tanking with her, obviously. You're going to want to plan her a bit more. But what really makes Asura shine are her abilities. Since Asura is a singer, or I guess a dancer if you were to go based off older Fire Emblems, she has access to the one ability that they always do, sing. And if you don't know what that does, well, it just gives another unit who's already used their turn another turn. Which means, well, if you have a really powerful unit in your group, just make Asura give them an extra turn and let them go hog wild, because, well, they can't stop you. Outside of that, well, she also gains access to speed plus that, well, I mean, it's pretty basic. It grants speed plus 1, 2, or 3 based on rank. That's really all you need to know there. And after that, she has access to Fortify Res, which, well, buffs resistance to adjacent allies for their turn. Basically, it's, the typical stuff, but again, resistance is a good thing to have. Already on to pros and cons? Wow, we're moving quick. I guess hers aren't just, she's pretty basic in a good way. Anyways, her pros are, well, pretty much just that Sing is the best thing in the world. I mean, if you could get your Hector or your Takumi or your Ryoma to have an extra turn, it's always a good idea to do it. I mean, why not? Sure, she's not the most tanky unit, but even then, Asura can apparently deal out quite a bit of damage, even though she's not, well, she's a singer. I mean, you don't expect that kind of stuff, do you? Outside of that, she can efficiently buff you with Sing, and of course, your resistance will be buffed as well. But, again, bright with the dull, and now we're moving on to the dull portions, which is cons. And I'll just be pretty honest here, she's extremely frail. She does not have very much resistance or defense, and her health can be a bit on the low side at times. And of course, this isn't aided by the fact that her weapon at the time, if you choose to equip it, the Sapphire Lance, is kind of a bad thing to have if you're going up against green units, so of course be prepared. And really, that's about the end of Asura here. She's a great character if you do get her. Try to make her sing. Seriously, you can't go wrong with it. But before we move on to green, we have one more character to look at in this spectrum, and that would be Lindy. Now, Lindy is a very fascinating creature. Not only are her magic stats and speed stats phenomenal, meaning that she is essentially a really powerful mage, she also has very odd abilities that kind of work around this to make her this strange support type mage as well. And nothing is a better example of that than her weapon Aura. And what Aura does is it restores 5 HP to adjacent allies after she initiates combat. And that means she can be a bit of a pseudo healer as well, which is this weird mixture, but strangely it can also work in her favor. To add that weird pseudo support to it as well, she also gains access to a command ability known as Ardent Sacrifice. And what that does is she sacrifices 10 health to give that 10 health to another unit. And it might seem a little weird, but trust me, she can really pull this off in a pinch and help out. It doesn't mean that you are going to be able to replace a healer with her, but she does help out with little supportive abilities sprinkled in from here and there. And from there, well, she kinda gains a lot of interesting passive skills as well. Mostly, she gains Speed Plus, which, well, grants her additional speed based on level. And Fortify Res, which grants resistances to those around her. So basically, she is a very interesting mage. But here's the kicker. She does a lot of damage. She is not one to be trifled with. Not only that, because it's a blue tome, that means that she's also at an advantage to this whole red meta that we have going on in the arena right now, outside of the whole, Takumi parties. But still, she can do a lot of damage, and she will do a lot of damage. Alright, so let's get to the pros and cons real quick, before we send Lindy out on her way. And that is, well, she's a very heavy damage dealer. Not only that, but Aura is also a very nice little thing to have when you need heals. Even if it's not the best, she still can support her team out. I don't really think of Ardent Sacrifice as something that's really that useful, outside of, well, maybe in a pinch, but I mean, it's there. She has a bit of versatility when it comes down to it, and it doesn't hurt her in the long run, so, I mean, why not? Okay, so let me just say, this con is kind of obvious, but, well, even for her, she's kind of weak in the defensive areas, and I mean pretty weak. To sum this up in the simplest way, if a melee character comes in and graces her with their presence, she is probably going to die. That's kind of how it goes with a lot of mages, but even especially for her. Not only that, but characters who have a ranged counterattack like Ryoma or Hector, she might have an especially bad time with, especially Hector, obviously, but still, be careful with her. Don't just send her out there like Asura, which I'm sure you're gonna do next time, but still, don't do it. Play safe. She's very strong if you plan out your attacks and, well, have a bit of a defensive perimeter around her. Otherwise, she gonna die. And that's the end of blues. Now it's time to shift focus to green, as well as our last unit here, and that would be Minerva. Okay, so let me just drop you guys a little secret between you and I. Minerva here, she has some of the best attack stats in the game, and that only is extended with her abilities and her passive skills, so be aware of that. On the adverse, however, I mean, she's mobile, but she's also a flying unit, which means that archers deal more damage to her, so, well, that's kind of a bummer. Also, her resistance doesn't, well, pan out, and her abilities certainly don't help with that. We'll get into that in a second. Her signature weapon, the Haute Claire, is also in this game, and with it, it essentially lowers the cooldown trigger for her special skills, meaning that the charge that she needs to use them is reduced by 1. Well, she does have a little bit of a defense against attacks, and that is in her special skills, Holy Vestments, and Sacred Cowl. And what these do is, well, they reduce damage inflicted by attacks from foes 2 spaces away by 30%, and with Sacred Cowl at 2 turns, that means she's going to be doing this quite frequently, so it's definitely a very nice ability to have, especially for a flying unit. Now, her passives are what I mean when it comes down to, well, great attack, but also kind of poor resistance because she has access to Life and Death as passive skills. And Life and Death, well, they grant attack and speed +3, but inflict defense and res -3. And of course, that upgrades to 4 and 5 based on the skill level. Outside of that, she also has Spur Defense, which of course, well, I mean, it's the typical buffing ability, grants adjacent allies defense +2 and 3, as well as Ward Flyers, which basically grants flying allies within 2 spaces defense and res +4. And well, outside of that, I guess we'll probably just dive into the pros and cons real quick and get that out of the way. So right from the get-go, the pros for Minerva are, well, she's very mobile, she can move quickly, and she has a lot of damage. And that means she can definitely go in and destroy units pretty quickly. Her Life and Death ability means that she's basically going to deal more damage and oftentimes have multiple hits, which is great for her. It means that she can blitz units really quickly and not have to worry about it. The cons I do have here, however, are quite substantial in their own right, and that is that, well, she has very little resistance, especially with Life and Death, and that means that she's going to take exceptional damage from not only red units, but red mage units, and even blue mage units, which means that she can be a bit, well, cautious when it comes down to it. Not only that, but also archers will have a field day with her. They won't be able to do a ton of damage, but they will do a lot more than usual, because, well, she's a flying unit. She's going to just get pinned down there, so you need to be careful with her, especially if there are mages and archers on the field, and I damn well know Takumi's gonna be there, so good luck out there, Minerva. And with that, that is our last character that we have focused on in this review. I hope you guys have found it at least interesting. I do want to ask how the new graphical interface works, and hopefully if you guys enjoy it or not, and it would be great to hear your input. So, yeah, there's that. However, before we leave, I do want to talk about one thing, and that is, of course, we did not cover any of the new characters that were released with the new focus change, Family Bonds, and that is mostly because I've heard interesting things and not so great things, and honestly, the next focus summon was already kind of data mined, and if that's what's going to be in the next, well, month, I can safely say it might be a good idea to hold on to your orbs for now, because right now, the characters that you get, both the twins, Seliph and Julia, are not exactly the most amazing, so I'm going to be waiting and seeing what happens when it comes down to that. Alright? So, well, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of bases here, and I hope you guys have had fun. And again, any opinions, comments, or anything, feel free to leave them. And of course, I would like it if you guys could leave a like. That would really help. Maybe share it with your friends. Oh, it would be beautiful. For now, though, I'm gonna be hopping off, and I will catch you all next time.